Welcome, everybody. I'm going to get started here in just a moment as we're just opening up the room. I'm going to put some links at the top, and my co-mod should be in here shortly, and we're going to get going. Okay, let's see. Welcome to the Amigos Club. The Amigos is the largest Latinx club here on Clubhouse. And today we are going to be talking about how to identify potentially dangerous behaviors in our teenagers in the light of the new occurrences that happened, of course, in Texas. And so, as for those of you who are new to our room, Rodrigo, Dali, and I, who those two should be coming in very shortly, we come into the Amigos every Friday at usually typically noon Eastern time. Today I had a thing for my kid. Who's also a third grader. And, it's the end of year craziness that's happening with all the presentations. And so I had to just push this back just a little bit so that I can go and watch her presentation because that was really important to her. So I apologize for being a little late today, but I'm happy that we are here to talk about this really, really important subject. And I'm going to be going ahead and make sure our co-mods know that they're coming in, that we're going to get it started. I do believe that the chat is also available for you guys to make comments and raise your hand and come on up and join the stage with me. As it is a discussion, not only just us talking about it today, we will be giving you tidbits and tricks and our knowledge as parent coaches. However, it is a conversation, so I hope that you do raise your hand and come on up. And I'm going to go ahead and get started in just 1 minute, actually probably less than that. I just want to go ahead and text these guys, tell them I started the room and that we're going to get going. All right. They should be coming in now shortly. Welcome to the Amigos Club, and we're going to be talking about identifying possible indicators of trouble in our kids. This is actually Rodrigo's idea, and he's going to be coming in here shortly with the light of what happened in Texas, and he's in San Antonio, by the way, so close to home for him. And our whole community here on the Amigos Club has been so saddened and mourning this tragic event that Rodrigo thought instead of our typically heard what we were going to talk about in-laws today. Then we switched our topic, and now we're going to be talking about how to identify possible indicators of trouble, and thought that was really important. I'll go ahead and introduce myself, and then I'll have Dolly introduce herself as we wait for Rodrigo. My name is Kristina Campos. I'm founder of The Impactful Parent. I help parents of school-age children turn their chaos into connection with their adolescents. So I try to help parents with their teens, and these are one of the things that I like to do with parents is help them identify what might be troubling behaviors, things that could be red flags, and I'm happy to have this conversation with you today. Above my head, this is my app. Although I do one-on-one coaching and online courses, it's really my app is how I primarily help parents. It's a free download. And if you like today's room and want more of me, that's really how you would do it. That app is not only free, but it's got hundreds of videos in there that are similar to what you're going to be hearing of us talking about today. In fact, sometimes I even take these replays and put them into the app. So, I hope you check that out because it's an amazing resource for you. And I'm glad to see that my other co-mod here, Dali, is here, and I'll have her introduce herself.
Hi. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Thank goodness it's Friday. I'm Dali. I'm a bullying awareness and prevention coach. So I work with primarily parents just to help them advocate for their children. And of course, and I'm also a parenting coach. So that's why I'm here because I like to contribute. And also, I think that Kristina has a lot of great topics that I really enjoy, and I'm always also learning from her. And I just want to thank everybody for being here, and I want to ask you to please share this room in the hallway, ping people in, and if you have a question or a comment and you want to share but you cannot come up and speak, use the chat feature, and I'll be monitoring that. And that's all. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dolly. I know Rodrigo will be joining us just shortly. I think he's in another room talking about this topic also. As this was Rodrigo's idea because he's very passionate about it, very close to home with him as he lives in San Antonio. And I just was like, yep, you're right. We got to change the topic. We need to talk about this today because parents need to hear it in case I know. One of the things that I've been talking about recently in the Amigos Club as we're mourning of what happened to our young children um, is that we put a lot of pressure on the teachers and parents to make change and to identify these troubled kids. But I really want to stress that anybody can identify a troubled kid and anybody can reach out to a kid that they think is having difficulty and make a difference in their life. In fact, parents are one of the, even though they're one of the most influential people in the teenager's life, that's also not the only person. And sometimes kids just don't want to listen to their parents. So it could be a coach, a community member, anybody. It could just be you who really can make a difference in a kid. And if you see some of the warning signs that we're going to be going through today, take note of that. Talk to that kid, reach out. And I'll tell you, their first reaction is probably going to be like, "Heh, no, forget you. I don't want to talk to you." And that's okay. Okay. Maybe they're not ready to accept some help, but what they are going to do is appreciate that you reached out with your concern. And even though teenagers act like they're all tough, I'm telling you, they roll their eyes, but their ears are open and they are listening to you. And it really does matter. So ignore all that frontal stuff and really go out there and make a difference in these teens' lives because they can use it. They really, really can. And so just, ignore the front sometimes that some teenagers have and just get past that. What I like to tell adults that get rejected by offering help to teens is just leave the door open. Say, okay, you may not want my help right now, but I just want to let you know that I'm here if you need me ever later on. And you just leave that door open. And um, that's going to be really important. I'm going to have Rodrigo introduce himself, and then we're going to go ahead and get started with some of these warning signs. Welcome, Rodrigo.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon to everybody that's here on stage with us. I just wanted to thank y'all for coming and really just listening. And if you have any questions, always we welcome people to the stage. But I really want to make sure that we talk about these possible indicators because obviously with a tragedy that just happened, that really hit home for a lot of folks. And I think it's really important, besides all the talk of why it happened, what happened, and this and that, how can we prevent it? And I know a lot of people talk about, oh, doors, oh, guns, oh, more this and that. But how can we prevent our kids, especially our young men, from subscribing to these philosophies and these ideas where they eventually commit these tragedies? Let's just be real honest, y'all. It's young men. It's after shooting after shooting after shooting. It's young men. That's the one common correlation among all these kids. So why is it happening? And that's why I want to tackle this issue, this prioritize what's happening, and really get down to the bottom of it with Kristina and Dali. Kristina obviously is a parenting expert, Dali a bullying expert, and myself when it comes to working with parents, co-parents who have separate homes for their kids, and how can that can affect their kids, because this child right here, this kid, and look, y'all, I get it. Okay, people are gonna say, oh, he's a monster and this is okay. I get it. You can describe him however the hell you want to describe him, but at the end of the day, we failed a kid. We really did. And that's why it's important that we have this conversation so we don't fail other kids. And so I think it's really important for us to have this conversation, this timely conversation, and really talk about what are we doing to prevent this from a parent standpoint. Because I really, in the bottom of my heart, I really feel like at the end of the day, it's all about the parenting. and the support systems and the help that we can give our kids when they have things that they're not able to handle. So I just wanted to stress that. Kristina, Dali, thank you all so much for being here, as always, leading the charge. And yeah, let's talk about it.
Yes, let's do. And this is the perfect time to share the room because we would like to get people in here, get educated, start our conversation. And we're just getting started. So if you could please push that share button down below, we'd appreciate that. And what I want to start with really is just I know we say it over and over again that teenagers are wired differently, but truly they are. You guys, a teenager's brain is still actively developing. And therefore they process this information differently than a mature adult. That frontal cortex part of their brain is used to manage emotions and make decisions and reason and control inhibitions, and it's restructuring during those teenage years. So forming it's changing all the time. And while the whole brain does not reach full maturity until you're at least in your mid 20s, this is why we don't want our kids to start, well, we don't ever want them to start using drugs, but it is so much more important not to start early because that really does affect their brain chemistry. And I don't know the chemistry of what was happening with this unfortunate young man who made these really bad choices, but that's something that is a possibility and it can alter brain function. So just want to make people aware. And then not only that, but teenagers read emotions differently because their frontal cortex is not, it's still working. So we as adults use our parental cortex to read emotions, but teenagers, they actually rely on their amygdala, which is a different part of their brain responsible for emotional reactions. And research shows that teens often misread like facial expressions. And when they're shown pictures of adult faces that are expressing different emotions, that teens will misinterpret a lot of facial expressions as angry. So when we say that our teens are super moody, okay, yeah, they got all those hormones. But I just also want to make you aware that a lot of times they think that the world is against them because their emotional part of their brain, when they're looking at people, they're reading a lot of people wrong. And I don't think a lot of that's very well known. I wanted to start with that as something like, hey, tidbit, they read people wrong. So unless you have a huge smile on your face, if you just like on your normal face and you're just like resting or you feel tired that day and you're interacting with a teenager, they literally will look at you and say, they don't like me. Oh my gosh, you don't like me today. What did I do wrong? And they will misinterpret that. And so it's something to be aware of. And just one of those first warning signs of why teenagers become so defensive and angry because they're reading you wrong. And I don't know if my co-mods, I want to pause there for a minute, if they've seen any of that working with teens before.
Yeah, I have definitely seen that. And I remember every time I always, like when a teen says to me, "Oh, my teacher hates me," and I'll ask them why. And it's so funny because you're right, they really do misread people's body language or sometimes even the tone. And I've even been present during some of those interactions with, say, an adult and a teen. And the teen will tell me, "Did you hear that? You see, he's very mad at me." And what I heard is completely different. It's like, no, not really. That was just, somebody telling you, "Hey, you should do this." Um, so it's almost like they're on a defense mode a lot more than not. And of course, that is heightened when something's going on in their lives and they don't even realize that they're doing it. So having those conversations with them is important to say, "Hey, I noticed that when this happened, you interpreted it this way, but this is what I saw. What do you think about that?" Instead of saying, "Hey, you were wrong. That's not what so and so was saying to you, or that's not how they said it to you," because then they feel like, oh, just totally invalidated, and then they don't even try to keep an open mind and replay that scenario in their head and see how maybe they could have interpreted it wrong. So it's a challenge, and I think it takes a lot of skill and a lot of patience to be able to have that conversation with them and say, hey, let's reevaluate. Do you really think that that's what happened? But at the same time, you don't want to ask in a way that they're going to doubt themselves, right? Especially when it comes to for reasons of safety. Because one of the things that I always tell kids is like, follow your intuition, but you also have to teach them to not overread, and it's different. And intuition is so different than being on defense mode. And that's all.
All right. And then another warning signs that you might see in a typical teenager versus a troubled teen is the changing of appearance. And I think we see that in kids where something is changing. So your typical teenager, fashion's important and they like to wearing proactive and attention-seeking clothing, and they like to dye their hair because they're trying to figure their stuff out. And they might want a tattoo. Who knows? Their fashion is going to change over time. But the warning signs of a troubled teen are a little bit different. So the changing appearance could be a red flag if it's accompanied with problems at school or other negative changes in their behavior. Like maybe they're cutting or doing self-harm, or they have extreme weight loss or extreme weight gain. Those are all warning signs when it's coupled with how they're looking and how they're changing their appearance. So be aware of that. That's a red flag. I know after Columbine, immediately there was an image to what these kids would look like, what a troubled teen would look like, right? And if I say that word, these kids from Columbine, do you have this photo in your head of what that looks like? And if you're not familiar, it's the stereotype at the time. I don't know if it's still there, possibly, but it's kind of looks like Neo from the Matrix, if you've seen that movie, where it's the long trench coat and they're wearing black, or maybe they painted their fingernails black. It's kind of gothic looking. um and that is not necessarily, that's a stereotype of what a troubled teen might look like. Could a troubled teen look like that? Sure, of course they could. That is what Kleeball and I forget the other guy's name from the Columbine. That's what they wore. So now it got labeled that way. But just keep in mind that it could be any big change in appearance and how your child might be looking, or how you see a kid looking, if they're starting to take a shift. And again, I'm going to go back to, it doesn't have to be your kid, right, guys? It doesn't have to be your kid. It could be any kid that you're aware of. It could be a niece, a nephew, a grandkid, a neighbor. Something to keep them aware of. I'm going to go ahead and close the mic again to my mods.
Yeah, no, those are great points, Christina. And before I get to those points and respond to them, really, before you even do all this and you start talking to your kids about this, lay the groundwork for good communication, y'all. One of the worst things we can do as parents is not communicate with our kids, and then we will want to communicate with our kids, expect our kids to communicate back the way we want them to. It's not going to happen. Okay. If you do not have a good, successful dialogue with your kids, if you don't have a relationship where y'all are open to talk to each other about that stuff, trust me, when you come up to them and you see them changing their attire, changing their moods, there's a swing in their attitude, they're going to perceive it as an attack. They're going to perceive it as oh no, now he wants to talk to me, this and that. Absolutely is not going to work because your kids are already on the defensive. So the first thing we have to establish is having good communication. What does that mean? That means, yes, taking the time out to ask your kid, hey, how did it go at school today? Oh, this and that. And yes, they're going to tell you sometimes, oh, it was fine, and then get back or this and that. You keep asking them those questions. Be involved in their everyday, day-to-day situations, and let them know that they can talk to you about things without you being judgmental, without you holding it against them. If there's an issue or whatnot, talk to them, because whenever you're going to have these difficult discussions, it's going to be super hard to have them if you don't already have that foundation. So, what Christina and Dali just mentioned right now, the points that they're making, they're absolutely right. But before you can even do that, you have to have a good communication. It's important because kids are looking for trust. Okay, you can tell them 100 times until your face is blue. You could trust me. I'm your friend. You're the only person. I'm the only person you need. And da da da. But they have to feel that. And the only way they're going to feel that is if you've established that trust. I know my dad. Look, my dad, again, I always refer to my dad, great guy, had a lot of faults and stuff, but my dad demanded me to trust him. When the hell has that ever worked? Okay, when somebody comes up to you and says like, "No, you're gonna respect me. Tell me what's going on and this and that." No, they're gonna shut in. I shut in. I didn't share with him, so I went through a lot of stuff myself. Situations at school, emotional feelings, all this other stuff, and I couldn't share it with him. I never shared it with him. And so that's why it's really critical to establish that base, make sure that we have a foundation where we can talk to our kids and our kids can talk to us freely and openly about these things. My son and I, we literally had a conversation last night. The last few nights we've had conversations about what's going on, about what has happened. And again, these are open conversations. We talk about a variety of things. I'll bring them up as we're having this room, but going back to what Kristina was talking about, changes in their mood and their attire, it doesn't have to be like, hey, oh, hey, I saw you wearing a black shirt yesterday with black. What's going on here? It doesn't have to be like that. If you've already established that foundation, you can say, "Hey, I see you got a new shirt. What's going on here? What's up with that?" Something not non-invasive, something that truly you're trying to get to the bottom of it, that you sound actually interested and not judgmental. Because again, if your kid is going through something, you want them to share something with you. You don't want them to ball it in. You don't want them to just leave it there and let them form their own narrative to somehow resolve those feelings in their own way. Obviously, not every single kid does this, right? But we don't want our kids to go to a measure where they are doing things. Christina, you mentioned earlier about cutting the young man that committed this tragedy, that the murderer that did this had exhibited signs and had told his friends that he was cutting. He showed his friends that there were the scars and his cuts and everything, and they told him, "Hey, dude, stop it." If his friends saw that, at some point, you're hoping that if you have a relationship with your kid, that you'll see it too. I pick up my son all the time and we play and we talk. And last night we were having burgers. I made homemade burgers. I'm looking at him. It's not like I have to inspect his arms. Let me see your hands if you're cutting. No, you'll know if something's off. If my son is wearing long sleeve sweaters here in the San Antonio heat, it's 93 degrees outside. Something's up. Again, I don't have to go up to my son and tell him, "Hey, let me see your sleeve. Let me, this and that." No, eventually you'll see it yourself. But when you have a good relationship with your kids, when you have good dialogue and there is communication there, those things will naturally come to you. They will talk to you about these things and you'll notice it. And if you do see cuts, if you do see something, an outward sign, yes, tell them, "Hey, I, you got a cut on your arm. What's going on there? Are you okay? And when you come across that way, they're not going to see it as an attack. They're going to see it as like, you know what, my mom, my dad, they care. And again, and like Christina was saying, it might not even be mom and dad. You might see a kid yourself that you have a relationship with. You might tell them, "Hey, are you okay?"
Oh, I did not know that about the shooter, Rodrigo, and that he was cutting. And just like Rodrigo was mentioning, they typically teenagers will do two things. They'll show their friends their cuts because it's a cry for help, but they won't show adults. So having even open communication with your child's friends is also a good idea. And I'm not saying to be invasive, but to be welcoming to the friends, to be nice to their friends, so that if the friends feel like they could come to you also in times of their own trouble or trouble with your child, that they feel like they could talk to you because you're a welcoming, nice person, could be really a game changer and a turning factor. Another thing, I didn't, geez, I just did not realize that he was cutting. That is so sad. Is just like Rodrigo also mentioned, look for the covers of like they'll they'll cutters tend to be embarrassed about their cutting, not with their friends but to adults. They hide it. So instead of saying, let me see your arms, like exactly, you're not going to say that. But look for that unusual behavior instead of, it's really hot outside. Why are you wearing, a sweatshirt, and why are you wearing a hoodie? And yeah, you're wearing hoodies every single day. Kind of, okay, every single day, and today is super, super hot. That might be a red flag for you to look at. If you invite them to a pool and now they don't want to go to the pool because they don't want to get into something that has less clothing, that could be a warning sign. And don't forget, cutting does not always happen just on the arms. It happens actually more often on the legs, in between the thighs, like on the thigh areas. Those are the places that are actually much more common than on the arms or on the wrists. And I know that's a stereotype to say arms and wrists, but it's not always there. And even instead of cutting, a lot of kids right now are picking. They're pickers. They find something and they're just picking at it until it becomes a significant wound. And that also could be a warning sign that they're having some trouble. They're picking at something and they're trying, maybe they don't have the willpower in them to take a razor and slide it across their arm, but they'll pick at something to a degree where it will leave a scar. It's bleeding. There's some cuts there. So just other things to think about. A, a typical teenager behavior that everybody will see is teens beginning to seek independence. So they'll butt heads with you and they'll argue. But a warning sign of a troubled teen, the difference is a consistent escalation of arguments, possibly violence, skipping school, getting in fights, running with the laws. That's the difference between your typical teenager behavior and then this more troubled teen. So keep that in mind. And I'll go ahead and close my mic to my mods.
Kristina, uh, I feel a little awkward sharing links around this young man, this killer, because I don't want to glorify or do anything like that with his name. But at the same time, we need to figure out what happened here so we can learn from this and really help our own communities, our own kids, our own family, the teens, the young men really that are around us. And like you said, the cutting he was performing was actually on his face. Okay. If you read several articles about what happened, again, spot on tip that you just gave right now. It talks about he became increasingly more aggressive, more violent towards his coworkers at the Wendy's that he was working at. People were noticing the behavior, his change, the demeanor, the way he was acting out. There were clear signs that something was going on. You know, who was talking to him, what was happening, who knows at this point. But there were clear signs, and like you said, when especially young men, again, I'm just going to call it out, y'all, it's young men. Okay, virtually every single mass shooter has been a young man. Okay, what is going on here that's driving them to these issues that they have to act out like this? And one of them is acting out aggressively and not being called out for it. When you read these articles and the employees from the Wendy's talk about it, oh, he was harassing, some of the young ladies. He was very mean towards some of the employees that were there. When they talk to the neighbors, they say, oh, he was getting in fights with his mom all the time. That he was yelling and this and that. It just leads you to believe, okay, there's something is going on there. There is some aggressive behavior that needs to be accounted for. What's happening? And the lack of a support system that he had compounded that because he had nowhere to go to talk to about that. Right now, in our own communities, there might be a young man like that. You may recognize a young man that, you know what, man, I've seen this kid before, and now he's acting differently. Something's going on, this and that. We don't know their stories. This young man, for example, didn't live had his mom, was not living with his mom anymore, was actually bouncing over to his grandma's house and had a stepdad. His biological father was not necessarily not really in the picture. There's a lot of things here where these systems of support that we need to have in order to support young kids, our daughters and our sons, but especially our young men, were absent. And this led to a further decline and a further erosion where this young man, this murderer, committed this tragedy. That's why it's so critical to understand what are the signs, and not again, not to idolize him or to lift him up or any bullshit like that. It's about understanding why he did this, where he came from, what were the factors, and ultimately applying those lessons learned to the young men in our community.
I'm going to go to our next warning sign, which is, mood swings and typical teenager behavior, hormones, developmental changes often means that the teen's going to experience mood swings, right? They're irritable. They're crazy creatures. Really.
Depressed, and I think I need to be diagnosed. I must have something. But just because they're saying that doesn't mean that you should ignore it. It's important to take your children and get evaluated if needed. And if you feel that that special person, like say as a family therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, is not really grasping what's going on, or you just have that feeling that maybe they're too quick to put them on medication and they haven't given other alternatives a chance, um, then seek help from somebody else. Get different opinions from different specialists, because there are some professionals out there who do believe, okay, well, all teens are dealing with this, so I'm just going to put them on this medication. The parents should go ahead and follow that my instructions. And it's okay to also tell your child, like, hey, do you think that maybe you just have been hearing too much of this, and now you're maybe concerned that you might have that same condition that you hear people having? Because sometimes kids, they're like, oh yeah, maybe I have been consuming too much of that. And you know what? The news,
But it's bottling up until you get an explosion. And it is so sad to me. So when you see this angry boy, I just want you to remember, you're just looking at the surface level, like the iceberg on top of the water. Underneath that, that's what you need to get to. And how you're going to get there, I mean, of course, like Rodrigo said, it's communication, it's connection, and it's love. It really is. Love is what is going to counteract all the negative shit, because the body wants to heal. The body wants you to love it. And that's really where this comes down to. This kid needed to be loved, and he didn't feel like anybody loved him. I don't know why. I don't know his situation. I don't know what was going on, but that would have been the combating thing. And it's too bad that a lot of our boys are feeling like this.
Christina, I love that point. It is so important that we understand that there is a distinction between the way that young ladies and young men communicate their feelings, how they are able to express themselves. My son and I literally just had this conversation last night, and we were talking about that difference and how it's so important to acknowledge that difference and why. Hey, so what's going on, bro? What's up, Papa? And he opens up. He does this, and it's so, it's almost like clockwork. It's a routine, but that's the way he's managing his stress and his anger and his frustrations. And I'd rather have that, a punching bag, because he's that, like you said, Christina. That's how a lot of young boys, young men, they need to release that, right? But they still need to talk about it afterwards. They still have that feeling, and so it's important that we have that communication and that we allow kids to express themselves, because this young man obviously had a lot of pent up frustration, a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, but they didn't have any way of letting that go. And it's a fucking shame that we let him down. Well, a lot of folks let him down. I'll say one last thing, and then I see that DD's up on the stage, and I appreciate DD for coming up, and I want to welcome anybody to come up so we can share our experiences and what we think, and really get down to this, and hopefully build a better understanding so we can help these kids, but specifically these young men with what they're going through. It's DD. How are you doing today?
Hi, everybody. Kristina, Dali, Rodrigo, thank you so much for emphasizing this part, especially Rodrigo, when you talked about the cultura, because you're right. Sometimes it seems like in our culture, the only acceptable emotion for a male Latino is anger, right? Because they can't express the other emotions because they're seen as quote unquote weak, or not man enough. And my late ex-husband had a childhood full of horrible, horrific trauma, and was brought up the same way, where you cannot express those emotions. Nobody wanted to hear it, but anger was acceptable. And unfortunately, as a young man, this was before I knew him, but unfortunately, as a young man, he took a life and went to prison for it. And while he was in prison, and then when he got out 17 years later, had to start doing the work of unpeeling those layers, where that anger was misdirected grief. It was misdirected hurt feelings from the abuse that he endured as a child. And but it's hard to bring that in awareness. And this was back in the 80s, where these mental health services were not prevalent, or they weren't talked about, and they were stigmatized. So thank you for talking about this topic.
I want
Of
to
course,
add one
Dee.
last
Yeah.
thing before Kristina takes it over and gives us another topic, and that's the fact that what you just mentioned, Didi. A lot of our parents, a lot of the men in our cultura have been brought up this way, in surviving, right? And they have loving hearts, but they don't know how to love the right way. They only love the way that they know how to love, and it's super difficult. My dad, I mean, a super tough guy. Real. I mean, when you see him and approach him, I mean, he's the type of guy that shakes your hand really hard if you're a guy. You know what I'm saying? He's, I mean, just machismo oozing out of him, and never cried. Always had this tough ass look, tougher look than the one that I have on my avatar. But when my dad drank, man, the tears would flow out, and he'd have so much pain, and he'd have so much hurt, and it sucked that my dad just cannot get over that upbringing that he has, that he can't really share his feelings the way he should share them, and the way he probably wants to share them, because he feels so tied to his identity of being the tough guy out there. And we can't let that happen. We got to be honest with ourselves, and really it's incumbent on us to change that. And it's going back to Kristina, her very first room, parenting better than our abuelitas. It's incumbent on us to be better parents and prepare our kids to be good parents as well.
Yeah, guys, I mean, I'm speechless. This is all so important stuff, and it's things that we need to work on. We need to give our boys space to express themselves. And that also leads me to the next thing is, if you want to help your troubled teen, whoever they are, you actually have to give them space to do that. And a lot of times we don't give them space. And I don't mean like, oh yes, we accept all the feelings, but to have that opportunity where you sit down with somebody and say, hey, I see something's going on, what can I help you? And listen, just listen. So many of us listen to respond, and that's just bullshit. We need to just listen so that they can get their feelings out, creating that space. And then let your teen have space to also retreat. I know that we complain about, oh, my teenagers are always hiding in their room. Okay, part of that is good. And the other part is it too much? So there's a balance there, of course. But allowing your teenager to have that retreat, to have that little space and privacy is really actually a very good thing, as they're going through a lot of shit themselves and experiencing a world that they are navigating and learning on their own. So if they to give them that space, I'm allowing you to say it's okay to give them that space. Now, you don't want them hiding in the room all the time, and that's when you want to step in and make sure that they're not too lonely, or they're not hiding and getting anxious, but give them that space. And my last warning signs for you guys is, as I talk about this, and I've said a lot of them already. We've talked about changing in appearance. We've talked about aggression. We talked about drug use, and all those things. But also, if you see your child playing with weapons of any kind and experimenting with them, this could also be something that you just want to look out for. It does not necessarily mean you have to intervene. hugely in, because a lot of times it'll start small. It'll start with, like, let's say a 6 to 9 year old who finds a knife, a pocket knife or something, and they just want to, kind of dig with it. And part of it is curiosity, and the other half could be playing and kind of experimenting with a weapon. And then, of course, that increases over time as they get older. So, and we all hear a lot right now with, blaming the video games. Okay, Rodrigo and I have had rooms on video games in the past. We're not anti-video game here, but there is some validity behind a lot of very violent video games and desensitizing. So that's just another thing you just want to think about, be aware of, as we go through this. And then threatening of others. Pay attention to how your child is interacting with other people. And I'm sure Dali could also step in with this, is how are they bullying people at school? Are they feeling so out of control in their own life that they're going outside of the house and trying to gain control somewhere else at school, maybe in their relationships, and they're just being way too aggressive with their friendships, with the people at school, because they are so out of control inside that they don't know how to express it. So what do? They go out and they bully. So I'll stop right there.
Yeah, and kids that were hurt in any way, like for example, bullying, we all know that they feel like, okay, if you can't beat them, join them. So it's really important to also watch those behaviors and listen to how they're expressing about incidents that they observe at school. You can learn so much from your kids just listening to them tell you about, say, a fight at school or among friends, because it'll give you an indication of maybe how they would handle it. And then even ask them, I was like, how would you have handled that better? How would you want somebody to respond to you if you were the one that, did that? Because kids need a lot of direction, and they also need to know that, say, if they give you an answer like, oh, I would have punched them in the face, um, instead of having a response of, well, I would beat your butt, or, you better not do that. Instead, just have a calm conversation and say, well, do you think that that's the best way to handle that? Because think about the repercussions. What are for every action there's a reaction. So what reaction would that yield you? Like, how would you feel about that consequence? Because they have to also learn that impulse gets in the way at this age, and they have to be aware of it, so that that doesn't dictate like how they're going to react in the moment, and then they'll regret it. Because a lot of these kids, they've already been victimized and they're just trying to survive. And of course, violence is not the answer. Sadly, a victim who has been bullied for a long time, and then they just get fed up, and then they end up using violence to defend themselves, they end up being re-victimized yet again, sometimes in a harsher way. I do know that sometimes it works. I know that sometimes you've been bullied and then you just punch them in the face one time or something like that, and it'll stop. But guess what? It doesn't always happen. And now schools are becoming, which is ironic because they're becoming more harsh with the punishment, but usually, from what I'm seeing, on the wrong kid, the kid that actually needed the help. Uh, and they're waiting until things have escalated too far. Um, and one thing that I always tell parents is, if you don't know how the school manages these situations and what it is they're doing to keep your child safe, you have every right to ask. You have every right to ask. The school psychologist usually handles any type of bullying or anti-bullying programs. The PTA or the principal handles any type of workshops, workshops for the parents to learn how to work best with the school for anything, whether it's academic or social emotional type of things. And one thing I just have to add this about the clothing, because Kristina, you mentioned it. When kids start coming home with new attire, keep in mind too that there's a new tactic of, well, maybe it's not new, but the looks are new, of gangs. So when kids, and I learned this years ago, the Attorney General of the state of Maryland came to one of our school districts and gave a big workshop about this, about how recruitment is happening. And these kids are sometimes being befriended by a kid, giving them, like, say, a new pair of jeans because they're like, oh, this is extra. My mom gave it to me, but here, you can have them. Or like shoes, or like a hat, and especially if it's a certain color or certain sports teams, they're slowly grooming, they're slowly bringing in your kid to this gang affiliation thing without them really realizing it at first. And then next thing you know, they're being kind of like blackmailed, like, hey, I gave you that, so now you have to do this for me. And then the kid gets angry, they feel like they can't say anything, and then they act out. So keep that in mind too, because oh man, kids, I don't know, I see it as it's so tough to be a kid nowadays because there's so many different pressures. Um, that are they follow you at home because of those devices that you carry in your hand, right? So I just wanted to add that too. Thank you.
I wanted to end our room with some of the preventative things that we could do to prevent this for the next time. And one of the things that I want to start off with, because Rodrigo just said it and it was like, yes, is he was talking about how his boys have a punching bag. And one of the things that you can do is help your teen find healthy ways to relieve their anger. And that's huge. Again, they don't know how to do it automatically. So not only are you leaving space for them to talk and express their emotions, but actually show them how they can express their anger. And it might be that you're role modeling that and showing them how you express your anger, how you decompress and exercise and all that stuff. You got to like emphasize that when you have exercise in their life and all those things, and you're showing them that it's great to punch out the bag or whatever you want to do with your kid to show them that, huge differences in how they'll be able to express themselves when they do come into these volatile situations where they just don't know what to do with all that emotion and they just can't, and they're so mad, and now they can express it constructively instead of go out there and be violent. Do you guys have any other ideas of how you can, what else can we do for our kids to prevent this?
Yes. I actually have had my kid, one of my older kids, she asked if she could take some bottles and break them against our wall because we had a solid brick wall in the backyard. And as kind of like the same version as a rage room, which is another option, and it's a thing now where different cities have rage rooms and they have different setups. Like one of them, like it can be electronic devices, and you take a bat to it, and you just to let off the steam. You can also take them out to the batting cages, because hit some balls with that the bat. Um, I love the one that Rodrigo said because my father actually used to do that. I remember he brought like the pair, the body bag, the gloves, and my sisters and we would take it out boxing. I loved it. That's my favorite one. Um, or also, of course, sports is always a good thing, and also even just a run, just like go for a darn run, just let it all out. And have your child choose what method instead of you telling them like go hit that ball, or um because the whole point is to just let them get it all out in their own way. And that way they feel like they're more in control. That's all.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. It's important to let your child choose how to that they like to relieve their stress. I mentioned the punching bag. I've taken my son to the shooting range. I don't want him to fantasize what it is to have a gun. I want him to know how it feels. I'm a pro 2A guy. You know what I'm saying? And what I mean by that I mean like, hey, I'm okay with folks having guns. You know what I'm saying? I'm for reasonable legislation and all that stuff, right? But I think people, it's okay to have guns within reasonable measure. I don't want my son fantasizing about the guns. And so what do? I've introduced him to him. He had a BB gun when he was little. I told him about, shooting safety. The very first thing I did was got mad at him because you know what he did when he got the BB gun? He immediately grabs it like he's fucking John Wayne or something, and is gonna shoot something and pointed it actually at me, by mistake while swinging it around. I scolded him. It was a great learning lesson because he realized, oh my God, you're right, I'm wrong, blah, blah, blah. Little kid. Now, when we go to the shooting range, it's nothing. We play Call of Duty, we play Grand Theft Auto. My son knows he doesn't fantasize it, but there's no gun fetish or anything like that. He just understands it's just part of it. They can be useful, they can be fun, XYZ. But at the end of the day, my son relieves the stress and we have a good time and we talk on the way over there while we're there and then when we come back. And it's really key, y'all. What Dali said right now, it's really key. Let your kids choose this. We've talked about this before, Dali, right? When we tell our kids, okay, hey, we got a date night, or we got, hey, mommy, daddy, daddy Sunday, or daddy mom, the daddy daughter day, or mommy daughter day, but whatever, right? You let them choose. Let them choose where to go. It's not gonna hurt you to go to a damn park for a couple hours. Because I remember this, Dolly, because you said this and it like stuck with me because it is so me with my son. You go to these places, your kids are gonna be droopy, but then they're gonna have fun, and then they end up talking to you. They end up saying something like, "Yeah, I've been having problems with this kid at school," and they just open up. Why? Because they feel safe, they feel comfortable, they feel like you're actually interested in what's going on in their lives. They feel like you are actually invested in them. That's what kids want to feel. They want to feel secure. They want to feel safe, like they can actually open up to somebody without getting judged, without immediately getting reprimanded, without you coming over here and saying like, "Oh, really? Oh, that's weird. Oh, toughen up." This and that. They don't want to hear that shit. They want to be listened to though. They want to be listened to and appreciated. And if you do that, they will actually be open to whatever suggestions you have. Okay, and this has happened to a lot of my clients and myself personally. When you talk to kids reasonably and they feel that you're being transparent and you're being trustworthy and honest, they literally will take what you have to say into consideration and will follow it. It's as simple as that, y'all. Because this whole I'm the sheriff of this town and this and that, man, we've been through that. A lot of us on the stage have been through that. A lot of people that are listening right now have been through that. And we know what we ended up doing. We ended up doing, for the most part, whatever the hell we wanted. And some of us got lucky, some of us didn't. So it's really important. Again, I can't emphasize it enough. Let your kids lead you when it comes to them relieving their stress, because it's really for them, and you're there to be supportive and create a space, create a system where they'll be able to relieve that stress. Whether it's a punching bag, whether it's movies, whether it's them reading a book with you, whatever the case may be, let them determine that stress reliever.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, Rodrigo. The going to the shooting range, I've done that too. I mean, with my girls. And I think that kids also learn to respect also the power that you can have with something like that, just like laser tag or any of those games. And I just want to mention this because I know that there are a lot of people that they're like, "Oh my gosh, how could you take your kids to go do that, especially with all the stuff going on today?" Well, it's all about how you present it. And just like any other conversation, if you talk about it like whispering, like there's something wrong with it, then they're gonna think something's wrong with it, and they're going to um, they'll be more tempted to misuse it. Because remember, whatever you stigmatize for a child, or whatever you say, no, don't do that, they're gonna be more curious, and you don't want that, right? You want to take that curiosity off and just show it to them. And like the rage room, right? Like some people are like, oh my gosh, how could you take a kid to a rage room? Doesn't that just um, re-emphasize that they should be angry? No, it's all about how you present it. We all do certain things to let out steam. And if you do it in a positive way, in a healthy way, and you tell them this is just to let off steam, there's nothing wrong with it, then your child will be just fine, and they'll learn to, do something with those emotions instead of letting the emotions control them. Because that's what you're doing. You're teaching them how to take control instead of those emotions controlling them. That's all.
100%, Dolly, 100%, because our kids, we can either they'll be desensitized towards guns, or they'll be desensitized towards school shootings?
Yes,
Which one is it going to
yes,
be?
exactly.
Are we gonna have them be okay with being around guns and just feel like, hey, guns are just guns? Or are we going to be like, hey, mass shootings are just mass shootings? Which one is it? I'd rather prefer that my son doesn't dream about guns and actually realizes, okay, here's the gun. There's nothing to it. Last point, Dali, 100%. When my son first shot his first gun, the real gun, really, we were at the shooting range. That kickback, oh my God, he couldn't believe it. And he
Yeah.
respected the hell out of that gun. I told him, I said, what the fuck did I tell you? I tell you to square up, put your feet down, and aim properly in this. You think it's a fucking video game. It's not, Papa. He goes, no, yeah, you're right, Dad. I'm sorry. Da, da, da. Rest of the time, we had a fun time. And now when we go over there, he respects it. He knows the rules. He knows what it takes. Does he like them? Yeah, he does. But he doesn't fantasize over them. He doesn't fetishize over them. And he's not one to be saying like this and that. Oh, yeah, I want to go online and buy guns immediately and do that. No, 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 no. He has a healthy respect for guns, and hopefully he carries that out to be a responsible adult when he's older as well.
I love everything you guys are saying. It's so great. I'm going to add that one thing that parents don't think about that helps prevent kids from being emotional is feeding them right. Feed your kids right. It makes a difference in how they feel about themselves, their mood, all that stuff. And if you're feeding them crap, that's where a lot of those hormones and stuff can take over. You actually have to feed them well. It's really important. As we're talking about preventative measures before we end our room today. So feed your kid good. And another thing would be, there's a lot of trauma that could come to the brain when our kids have head trauma, and that head trauma we need to take seriously, whether they're playing football and they're getting one too many concussions, or rugby or whatever other thing, the falls that they do. I know in our Latino culture, sometimes, especially with our boys, we're like, you get up, come on, shake it off. But really, if your kid gets hit in the head, that is something you really need to look at, people, because they could seem fine right now, but then as their brain starts to develop, it could be a problem in the future. And you don't think about that the concussion they had when they were 5 could affect them when they're 15, that they're not thinking correctly or have a skewed point of view. Along those same lines, the same kind of trauma when birthing trauma, so pregnant women taking care of themselves, all of these things, like if a woman is doing drugs and alcohol while she's pregnant, that actually does affect the brain chemistry of their baby. So things to think about in those prevention ways of why things why it just happens, and it's so horrible, it's so sad, but those are real things that I want to make everybody aware of.
Kristina, I'm so glad you said that. Here at the university that I work at, we have criminal justice faculty that did research. They worked with some of the public health faculty to look at maternal health and how it impacts the variables that contribute to criminal behavior. And so they actually were working on a study. I don't know if it's been published already, but looking at that same thing, you think of fetal alcohol syndrome, and you think of how some of these other, like you said, the impact of drugs, the malformation of the frontal lobe, and how the frontal lobe impacts impulse control and so many other things, and not just the frontal lobe. Disorders with the corpus callosum, that white matter that connects both the right and the left brain hemisphere. So I'm so glad you said that.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Yeah, people don't think about that it could, I don't want to put blame on any mother or anything like that, but it's true. That shit is real. And so we're talking about prevention. You have to mention it. It's a big deal. Well, you guys, we are a little bit over. Is there anything else you would like to add? My mods, anybody want to come up and add
Yeah.
some last things?
I just want to add, with all the shootings and stuff, because it wasn't just one that happened the last week, it was actually several. Um, don't avoid talking about it with your children, because sometimes that hurts them even more. Check in with them, be gentle, and let them do most of the talking. Just ask them, like, hey, how do you feel about everything that's been going on lately? and ask them, do you feel scared? How can I help you feel safer? Is there anything you want me to ask the school about your safety, the safety measures that they have in place? Because remember that when children know that there's a plan, they feel safer. And also talk to them about, if something were to happen, what is the plan between you and I? Because I know that the school's going to call, right? The schools are always going to call as soon as possible. But kids just want to know that there's a plan, and avoiding the conversation is not going to help because they're just going to imagine every horrible thing possible. And you want to make sure where their mindset is, how much are they thinking about it, and how can you help them feel safe? Because that's really all they need. That's all.
That's a great point, Dolly. And that's something that we're always stressing here in this room. And I stress with my clients. I spoke with one of my clients yesterday. I personally have been affected greatly by this tragedy. It really consumed me. It's still consuming me, to be honest with you. And I'm just trying to make sense of everything, right? But my client and I, we ended up speaking for 5 hours. I mean, just amazing conversation, just talking about stuff. I only charged an hour. That's probably all me. But one of the questions was, how do I tell my kids about this? And I always tell folks, be honest about every situation. Because if not, and if you don't talk about it, it's still gonna be there. And your kids are gonna develop their own narrative. They're gonna figure it out on their own. And it could be influenced by their friends. It could be influenced by YouTube videos. It could be influenced by social media, another relative, whatever. No, be honest with it. It doesn't matter if it's your divorce. You're going through a pending divorce. Yeah, it sucks. And yeah, your kids are going to be hurt, but be honest with them. You don't want them to feel like they're the reason that you're getting a divorce. There was an accident that happened. Be honest about the accident that happened. Yeah. Hey, I fucked up. I messed up and this is what happened and here's how I'm learning through this and this and that, because you want your kids to know what happened and to be feeling safe and secure that they have the right information. So don't avoid these topics. I told my class, I said, no, meet it square in the eye. Tell them, hey, so what do you think? I mean, are you and your friends talking about this, or what do you think, and this and that? I had that conversation with my son, and one of the things that my son said is like, man, I can't believe how weak he was. And I said, slow down, slow the fuck down. What do you mean how weak he was? Well, yeah, yeah. I don't know. And my son started talking about memes that are on the internet. And he started talking about like, well, I read on Instagram this happened and this and that. And then I explained to him, I said, man, look, Papa, yes, he killed those kids, man. He's a fucking murderer, man. Terrible. But what led him to that, man? And then we started talking about support systems. We started talking about how privileged my son is to have a good mental health, a good mental health, a state of mind where he can handle traumas. He had a breakup recently. He's handling it. He's. I don't feel he's depressed. He doesn't. He tells me he's not, and I see him. Yes, he gets a little, off kilter, and he punches his bag and this and that. But he's learning how to deal with it healthily instead of just simmering there and not talking about it. When he broke up, he came to me and he literally told me, Dad, I need a hug. And I hugged him. And he told me he broke up with his girl and yada yada yada, right? We need to let our kids, our young men know that it's okay to talk about this shit. That they have a safe space to talk about stuff. So yes, and in my last point that I wanted to share with everybody is I posted a link in the chat right now, from the Daily Mail, and they're talking about there's an interview. It's a whole article, but there's actually a video of the stepdad, the young man's mother's boyfriend, of the stepdad, and I would really appreciate if y'all would see that. Just look at that, and you realize that a lot of these parents are not equipped, man. They're just not ready. They don't have. They love. You could see from the video the guy's pained. He's confused. He doesn't know what's going on. He's like, "Fuck, man, I didn't see anything." But can we really, really honestly and truthfully depend on someone who doesn't know how to show that love, who was raised in the same toxic environment that my dad was, that a lot of our parents were? Can we depend on these folks to raise these kids? It's fucking tough. My dad grew up with a survivor mentality. That's the type of love that he gave me. That's why I have to eat every single taco I have, even when I'm already full, by that scarcity mindset. It's all these things that have been that are passed through generationally through our the knowledge, the wisdom, and the love, and our DNA, everything, and it comes to this point. And so some of us are just, it's just difficult. It's difficult. Do they have hearts? Yes. I'm positive this kid had some love somewhere. It just wasn't nurtured. It wasn't nourished. And honestly, there's a ton of kids like that. They don't see a way out. And it's really incumbent on us to do our job as much as we can within our local communities, at least to reach out to these young men and ask them, hey, are you okay? And start that foundation of communication where they're going to feel safe, that they can share how they feel. Because right now, a lot of these kids don't feel safe. And instead, they bottle it up and they start subscribing to these philosophies, whether it be an incel culture, whether it be white supremacy, whether it be the loss of men's rights and all this other shit that's going on. They're losing it. And instead of us confronting it, we're like, no, they'll be all right. I see my son. Yeah, he's a loner. He's on his Xbox all the time, but he's cool. He gets B's and C's. We got to be better parents, y'all. And if not for our own sake and our own kids' sake, at the very least for other people's kids, because the way we raise our kids does have an impact on our community, and we're seeing this right now, where this young man, this monster man, just killed these kids. So that's all I wanted to share.
And I'll leave you with, it starts with us. I know right now we're all trying to point fingers and blame, and whether you're blaming guns or you're blaming that kid or you're blaming, I don't know, whoever you're blaming, that's a natural reaction as our brain is trying to make sense of this horrible thing that we can't make sense of. Blame goes first in our bodies, but really, it all starts with us. You can make a difference. You can reach out to a kid today, whether it's your own or somebody in your community, a neighbor, a nephew, a niece, whatever. Reach out to somebody, make a difference in their lives, make a connection with a kid, and you will change the world for that kid. And then eventually you'll change the world for the world. So just instead of pushing blame, let's just everybody take action. If we all had an opportunity to make that connection with one kid in this world today, everything would be different in our world. It really would. But we are busy. We're adults and we get into our things, and some of us aren't parents, and so we're busy. No, that's bullshit, and it's an excuse. Make the time to reach out to a kid today, and you're going to see dividends come back to you a million times over. So I hope that you come and join us again. We are here on the Amigos Club every week, usually at noon Eastern time on Fridays. And next week we'll be back. Next week, our scheduled meeting is going to be about how we teach culture to our kids, which I think is going to be an awesome room, because then we could talk about how do we teach our culture to kids, and are we passing down some of this toxic stuff that we don't want to pass down anymore, or are we in bettering our kids so that they're not, are we parenting better than abuelita? Are we? Because that's really the goal. So come join us again next week. And if you have a topic that you'd like to hear and talk about, I'm actually going to be doing scheduling by the end of today. So send me a DM. I would love to hear what topic you would like to talk here and have the conversation about. And I'm open to putting that into a room. So until next time, you guys, you got this. Thank you for my mods for being here. Thank you.
Have a good weekend, everybody. Thank you.